My name is Ava. Currently, I've gone back to my hometown for childbirth. My husband, Jeffrey, is waiting for us at our new spacious apartment that we moved to for our child. I gave birth to my long-awaited child in my hometown while being supported by my parents who were waiting for their grandchild. We named him Thomas. He's a boy. When I informed Jeffrey about Thomas's birth, he texted back, "Congrats on the baby. Why don't you take it easy for a bit?" That message felt a bit curt to me. It's his son that's been born. I think he can worry about it a little more. However, Jeffrey ended our messaging exchange quickly without even asking for a picture of his child. I decided he must be busy with work and chose not to ask him anything. After completing my childbirth in my hometown, I decided to return to the apartment where Jeffrey was waiting a few weeks later. I didn't want to use public transportation like trains, so my dad agreed to drive me to the apartment. I returned to the apartment excited that I could finally show him Foma's face. Holding Thomas and accompanied by my dad who was carrying the luggage, I headed to our apartment where Jeffrey was supposed to be waiting. Today's a Sunday, so Jeffrey should be home. Jeffrey is the indoor type and, unless he has something to do, he would typically be home. As I unlocked the front door, I heard rapid footsteps from inside. I quickly realized those weren't Jeffrey's footsteps. They weren't usually so hurried. Rushing out from the living room was, surprisingly, my mother-in-law. I don't get along well with my Mill. Whenever she sees me, she makes passive-aggressive remarks. When I visit the in-laws with Jeffrey, and he and my father-in-law are not around, she often says, "Still working full-time even though you're a wife. No one thinks a working wife is attractive. You should quit your job soon." Without even knowing about my job. Furthermore, she says, "Your chores are neglected because you're working. Aren't you making Jeffrey help with chores too?" A wife should help her husband with everything, from changing his clothes to other tasks, making unrealistic demands. One day, Jeffrey happened to hear one of these remarks, but he only responded with, "Both of you, get along, please." It seems he thought my Mill and I were having a mutual argument, not realizing I was being subjected to one-sided criticism. Still, Jeffrey is well aware that I'm not comfortable around my Mill. I'm sure my Mill knows I don't like her. That's probably why she chose to be here when I returned from my hometown after childbirth. As evidence, my father-in-law isn't here. He's always been considerate, saying, "Ava must be tired of seeing her in-laws all the time. We'll keep our visits to a minimum." So, if he were here, he'd probably just take a look at his grandchild and then leave. However, with the absence of my father-in-law, who usually keeps my mother-in-law stop, the situation changes. My mother-in-law immediately started comparing me to my newborn, Thomas, in my arms and sneered. "I thought I'd never see a grandchild while I'm still alive, since you've been working all this time. I wonder when you had time to have a child with another man." I was taken aback. Her first words were just so harsh. My dad, who was carrying the bags, wasn't at the front door, so to my Mill it probably looked like I had returned alone. She thought we were alone, and started venting. "Mill, why would you say such a thing? This child is genuinely mine and Jeffrey's." "Oh really? Jeffrey actually had a child with you? You're not very good looking, to say the least. You're stubborn about not becoming a housewife even though you're married. I find it hard to believe that Jeffrey would have a child with someone as unattractive as you. Why don't you ask Jeffrey directly then? I think he'd tell you the truth." "Well, I'm asking you. Whose child is this?" I sighed. I didn't know how to talk to this clueless woman. If this goes on, she might even start talking ill of my newborn. I think I'll try to send her away quickly. Mill, I'm tired from giving birth. If you want to see your grandchild, could you please come visit another day? And if possible, with my father-in-law." "Huh? What are you talking about? My home is here." "What?" I frowned, wondering what on earth my Mill was talking about, but she confidently puffed out her chest. "I'll be living in this high-rise apartment, so it's pointless to try to kick me out. Actually, I'm the one who owns this place now. If you go against me, you'll be the ones getting kicked out." I sighed again. Her logic was so messed up that I began to doubt if she was truly wiser than me despite being older. "This apartment is originally where Jeffrey and I lived. You're not paying any money. You can't claim to be the owner." Yet, my Mill remained unabashedly confident. "The owner of this room is Jeffrey. Jeffrey is the one who let me into this high-rise apartment. He basically handed over the authority of this room to me." Do you really think that such reasoning works? The main pillar of this house is Jeffrey. So, as Jeffrey's mother, I hold even more authority. A daughter-in-law and her child should be in a lower position. The mother-in-law saw my what a hassle expression and laughed loudly, as if thinking she'd won. Daughters-in-law don't get their own rooms, lol. If you want to stay, I might just lend you space in the closet, lol. But only if you pay $1,000 a month, lol. Then, I'm leaving. I declared as much and then looked at my father beside me. Dad, can I go back to our family home? My father, having heard all of Mill's snide remarks, nodded firmly. The Mill seemed utterly unaware of anyone else's presence, looking as surprised as if she'd been shot with a BB gun. However, the mere fact my father was there didn't seem to slow down her momentum. Going back to your parents is such a shameful thing. LOL. This is why incompetent daughters-in-law are no good. LOL. Get out of my sight with that I don't even know whose baby is. My father responded to the loudly laughing Mill in a calm voice. I'll be informing your husband about this. Saying only that, he grabbed our things and headed back to the parking lot. Mill, apparently not quite grasping the situation, yelled after us from the open door, laughing scornfully. What's telling my husband going to do? LOL. There's no way my husband would ever feel sympathy for a failed family like yours. He'll probably tell you to never approach our house again. Do you know my husband is a company CEO? Why would he deal with a family when we don't even know what kind of job you have? We live in completely different worlds. If you get it, then tuck tail and run. Perhaps she was delighted by my decision to leave, because her laughter echoed all the way to the parking lot. She really should consider the neighbors. My father and I got into the car and simultaneously sighed. I heard you weren't getting along with the Mill. But I never imagined she'd be that terrible. Right. She always acts sweet in front of Jeffrey and father-in-law. I thought no one would believe me. I've only told Mom and Dad, but she was worse than you imagined, wasn't she? Yes, indeed. My father drove us to our family home. As he drove, I called my mom. My mom was concerned and told me, be careful and come back safely. Didn't seem like Jeffrey was around, but do you think he agrees with my Mill's farts? At my dad's question, I shook my head indicating I didn't know. For now, I fought to contact Jeffrey. But before I could call him, Jeffrey was the one to ring me up. As soon as I picked up, Jeffrey began talking in a frantic tone. I heard you came home for a bit. Where did you go? I'm going back to my parents' home. What? Jeffrey, it seemed you weren't in our apartment earlier. Where in the world were you? I went shopping 'cause my mom asked me to. She wanted me to buy lobster for a lavish dinner at night. I thought I sent you a message before I left, saying around what time I'd be at the apartment today. I think you even read it, so why'd you prioritize shopping? Well, it was a request from my mom. You could have told me you were going shopping, couldn't you? Why didn't you contact me until just now? Jeffrey was at a loss for words hearing my questions. He's always like this. He doesn't want to get involved in disputes, so he doesn't take anyone's side. He doesn't side with me, nor with my Mill. I guess this time, he listened to my nearby Mill and took me for granted. Maybe he thought I wasn't as quick-tempered as my Mill. But I'm not the kind of person who'd stay silent after being treated like this. I let out a big sigh. Hey, do you know what your mother told me? Huh? You told her to leave, right? She came over out of goodwill to help with household chores while you were gone. It was your mother who told me to get out. To be more specific, she said our son isn't yours, Jeffrey, and that there's no room for a daughter-in-law here, so she'd rent out a closet for $100 a month. She said a lot of awful things. Come on, adults wouldn't say things that terrible. You're exaggerating, right? My dad was there too, so he heard your mother's outrageous remarks. And I was right there listening too, you know. With two witnesses, you still believe what your mother says. It's not like that. Then what is it? Are you going to side with me and ask your mother to leave our apartment? You're going to kick out your mother. At my assertive tone, Jeffrey fell silent. He no longer intends to deny what I said, but he won't kick his mother out either. Despite his own child being questioned if he's from another man, Jeffrey doesn't seem to grasp the situation. I was dumbfounded by his ignorance. I get it. I'll leave then. So, both you and your mother better leave that room too. I'll start the termination process right away. What? Jeffrey exclaimed in shock from the other end of the phone. Did you forget? That apartment is under my name. By the way, haven't you told your mother that I earn more? She keeps telling me to quit working and just be a housewife. I was fed up with it, you know. How long do you intend to let your wife endure such verbal abuse? Wait, just wait. We finally got this high-rise apartment. Don't just terminate the lease like that. It's a waste. At this point, that's all you've got. You think after pushing out the landlord, which is me, you can continue living there? I didn't kick you out. You're letting your mother who kicked me out roam free, aren't you? That basically means you're allowing her to drive me and our child away. I'm not that generous to rent my place out to strangers. I ended the call. I was disgusted by Jeffrey's indecisiveness, failing to protect his family. If in the future the mill says something hurtful about our child, Thomas, I bet Jeffrey would just brush it off saying, "Come on, calm down. I don't need a man who can hurt his child. My job is flexible. I can work anywhere as long as I have my computer, and my income is stable. I can take care of Thomas by myself. Actually, I don't need Jeffrey, who doesn't even try for a promotion or study for a better qualification, and relies on my earnings. Even more so if it means dealing with that irritating Mill because of him. My dad dropped me at my parents' place and said he had somewhere to go. Likely to Jeffrey's dad. Mill doesn't seem to realize the mistake she made. She didn't even know that my father is also a business tycoon. Because my dad and Jeffrey's dad have a close connection through their roles as company CEOs. So, they introduced their daughter and son to each other, and as a result, Jeffrey and I got married. It seemed like my mother-in-law either had no interest or just wasn't informed, because she acted like she had no idea that my dad was a CEO too. But as a result, she belittled both me and my dad, and then reported it to Jeffrey's dad. Jeffrey's dad, unlike my Mill, is a sensible person, and not indecisive like Jeffrey. He can rightfully scold someone when they are wrong, like he did with my Mill. After a while, my dad came home and told me that Jeffrey's dad was as mad as a hornet at Jeffrey and my Mill. Upon hearing from my dad, Jeffrey's dad immediately summoned my Mill and Jeffrey. In front of my dad, he made her repeat the snide remark she'd made about me and gave her a piece of his mind. Witnessing this, Jeffrey shrunk back, trying to argue that he wasn't there at the time. But he was scolded for that being the wrong attitude in the first place. The next day, my father-in-law came to my family's home with a box of candies as an apology. However, I just couldn't feel like forgiving them, so I declined the candies and sent them away. During this time, I terminated the lease of our apartment. Since Jeffrey and my Mill need to leave the apartment by the end of the month, they both came back their family home. They kept apologizing, but I told them, you only started apologizing when you realized the situation was detrimental to you, and sent them away. At the same time, the Phil said because of the abusive language towards the daughter of the president of another company, the transaction may have ended. I don't need a wife who has no common sense like you. And it seems he's considering serving her divorce papers. Jeffrey, who was working at his dad's company, was told, we can't have someone without ambition here. If you don't show results in 3 months, either you'll be demoted, or I'll have to send you to a factory I know. So, it seems he's now studying hard to get a certification. However, since Jeffrey had been relying on my earnings, he's finding it hard to start his studies from scratch. I get frequent updates from my father-in-law about them. My Mill keeps pleading with him not to divorce her, not bothering to find a job, and hasn't even unpacked her belongings in the apartment. And Jeffrey, having difficulty with his studies, is now sobbingly seeking help from colleagues who already have certifications. I'm now contemplating handing Jeffrey divorce papers too, and have already filled out my section. When I called him, he answered within 3 rings. Hello, Ava. Are you coming back? Why would you say that? You need to leave by the end of the month, remember. There's no coming back in this situation. Did you really end the apartment lease? I was the one got kicked out, remember. I'm so sorry. Please, let's live together again. But don't you have that 3-month deadline? Either you'll be demoted or you'll have to change jobs. I don't want to spend any more money on you. I can't imagine living with you anymore. I'll leave the divorce papers with your dad. Fill out your part. Why divorce? I didn't kick you out. I sighed. It's true, it wasn't Jeffrey who kicked me out of the apartment. It was my Mill. And it's not wrong for me to be angry that Jeffrey didn't stand up to my Mill for me. But the main reason I believe I can't live with Jeffrey anymore lies elsewhere. You never once asked about the child, did you? Wondering what the child looks like, or what happens to a child who's been thrown out. Being told they're not your child. Before trying to get on my or your mother's good side, you should be worried about your child. Even when I told you I'd given birth, you seemed like you didn't care about the child. I can't feel any sense of responsibility from you as a father. That's why, thinking about raising a child together from now on is out of the question. What? Can't we ever go back? At his words, I hung up immediately. I don't need a father who doesn't care about the child at all. I handed the divorce papers to Phil as planned. After Jeffrey finished the divorce papers, they were handed to me from Phil, and I immediately submitted them to the city hall. In the end, the mill got a divorce, and Jeffrey seemed to have been transferred to a place similar to Nebraska, moving from one relative's house to another. Currently, with the support of my parents and others, I'm pouring a lot of love into Thomas.